Hello and welcome to the First Time Founders podcast, the show where we talk about how to start a business from nothing and grow it into something meaningful. Today I'm talking to Ian Jones, who's Managing Director of Care and Independence, a healthcare products manufacturing business that he'll tell you all about during the episode. The reason Ian's on is we met at an Entrepreneurial Operating System, EOS UK conference, where various entrepreneurs, visionary founders, integrator MD types come together to talk about how they're running their businesses using this common management system. We bumped into one another over coffee, and what I found so fascinating about Ian is that he leads a VC backed business in a kind of real world physical deliverables space, which is quite unusual for VC backed companies. And he turned that business around, took expenses out, which a lot of VC backed companies are having to do at the present moment. And then got that business onto a growth flight path with the backing of VC majority controlled board using EOS. So hopefully this will be really timely and useful content for a great many of our listeners. So without further ado, enjoy my conversation with Ian Jones. Ian, welcome to the First Time Founders podcast. Thank you for doing this.
You're very welcome. Great to see you. Great to see you.
I feel like we're old friends now. So for our viewers and listeners, we actually don't know each other that well, but we met at a EOS Entrepreneurial Operating System conference, didn't we? Which it does feel a bit like a cult, those things.
It did, and it's difficult to realise it was only a few weeks ago. As you say, it feels like there's a lot of water gone under the bridge in the meantime. We really know enough about each other to think this has gone more than just a few weeks in terms of us knowing each other. So.
Yeah, it was brilliant. So why don't for people viewing and listening, before we get into EOS, like be useful to just tell them a little bit about the business that you run now and how you came to sit in the seat you're in.
Okay, so I'm now Managing Director of Care and Independence. I've been in this business 5.5 years. Up until it was my first MD role, actually. Up until that time, I was heavily focused on finance and operations. All in the same industry. So I've been in the medical device healthcare industry for 30 years now. I'm a chartered accountant. That's where I started my grounding. But I've always had an interest beyond the numbers. And that's where my digging got into and took me into a more operational role. And I was fortunate enough to be promoted for the first 15 years of my career through the same organisation up to the point where I led finance and operations for a £130 million division. And 700 people, employing 700 people. So it was a great move for me into where I am now, into an MD role. So I pretty much had every discipline and responsibility under my belt, except development and marketing. A wise old so-and-so once told me, if you don't know it, just make sure you get somebody who does know it. So 80-90% is common sense, and then get good teams around you, and you can't be an expert in everything. And that's where that's how I've learned, and I've got good people in around me. So yeah, I moved into general management, and I've had this MD role, and I started life in this industry in a small business. It was a £4 or £5 million division of a £200 million business, and I loved it. I felt as though I could contribute at that level. So it's not a surprise that I've now found myself as an MD of a 5, 6, 7, £8 million growing business. Because that's where I feel I can add most value.
And what is it that attracted you to the current business? Like, what does it actually do?
So we manufacture and we design, manufacture and distribute medical equipment for those who aren't able to help themselves. So it's moving and handling equipment. So typically the majority of our end users, not our customers, the end users are disabled people who need help and assistance with their moving, whether that's out of bed into a bathing facility or out of bed into a chair. And that's what we help them. We improve their lives. We help them to do things they wouldn't have otherwise been able to do themselves. And as I say, I've been in this industry for 30 years, and it's just so rewarding. I've had family members who have used medical equipment, not ours, over the years. And when you get a real empathy in that, and probably every person has got a story about somebody within their family or close friend who has needed help with medical assistance. And when you're in it, you're in it, and it's very. You never want to leave the industry, and that's why I've been doing it for 30 years. So.
You know what's interesting? When we met at the conference, and you're an integrator, finance guy. You say he's not in sales, man. Lead sales. But you said to me, it really spoke to me. I mean, look, I'm soft and cuddly, sort of wannabe visionary type. But you said to me, you know what? When people buy our gear, we put the care that's deserved into that product, because if someone's being lifted out of a bed X times a day, it matters whether that experience is optimized or not. I can't remember the words you used, but
Yeah,
I remember thinking,
it,
fucking hell, that's pretty powerful.
yeah, it's comfort and dignity. Everyone deserves it. We all do things in our life where we can make ourselves as comfortable and do things as dignified as we want. They can't. So whether somebody is sitting in a chair for 3 hours a day and they can't move themselves, they have the right not to end up with a pressure sore on their sacrum. You and I can move around in our chair to make that not happen. They deserve, if they're being lifted for 40 seconds, you and I, when we get up out of a chair, we do it in a dignified way. They can't do that. So our product has to be designed in a way that, one, is most comfortable for them, and secondly, it's dignified for them, because they can't do it themselves. And that's our mantra behind everything we do. So we put a lot of care and time and effort into making sure that's what we do. And by the way, that goes beyond the user as well. That goes to the healthcare professional. So a healthcare professional deserves to be able to manage that client, manage that user in a dignified way. They don't want to necessarily be stood there thinking that the user is compromised or is uncomfortable. That if you're a worker within it's rewarding enough being a manufacturer in it, but if you're a worker within the healthcare profession, we all know during COVID what they did for this country. But they do that every day. They didn't just do that during COVID. They do that every single day. They do it now. They did it before. So we try and do our part, play our part in that.
Do you know, it's funny. I already knew that story, and it gave me goosebumps again. Like, I don't know if it's because I connect with the end user story, or if it's just you love talking to business leaders that give a shit, and that can articulate why they care. So, all right, awesome. So, finance, you get why you understand the sector. So, how did you discover the entrepreneurial operating system? And then we'll maybe spend the rest of the time talking a bit about sort of the before and the after, and why it is you're such an advocate for that now.
So the discovery actually first took place in of all times, July 2020.
Really?
Right, slap bang in the middle of COVID, when we were going through a fairly significant and major business reorganisation. The business was in a turnaround. At that time, so it was introduced to me by my sales and marketing director, who had experience, and he knew an integrator. An implementer.
Yeah.
So we had that first call in July 2020, and I remember thinking, this isn't for us right now. We're right in the middle of a major turnaround. 1 year later, when we'd stabilised the business and we really, I would say the business was turned around, we went into a growth mindset, and we realised that both of us, we've been in growing businesses, but we didn't really have that proper skill set and that proper discipline in order to be able to do that. So we reconnected with the implementer that we knew, a guy in the States, Dave Feidner, and said, we think you've got something that's useful for us, but it's got to help us grow, because we've got to change the culture in this business where everyone was used to firefighting for a number of years. So anyway, we had a second meeting with him. I liked what I saw. I got an indication as to what 1 year costs were going to be for him to implement that for us. I went to the board, persuaded the board that it was absolutely the right thing to do. And we haven't looked back since. At that time, I was conscious that we were doing a number of good things anyway. So we were starting to do good things around our people. We were starting to do good things around our culture. We just didn't really have that umbrella under which to do it all under. And this, for me, provided that perfect umbrella. I mean, I'm glad I made the decision when I did. If I knew then what I know now, I'd have rushed this through so much quicker. So it was untrue, because it's just delivered so much more. It's delivered so much more than my expectation.
I found the same thing in my business, and it's interesting because, like you, I'd come through the legal track. I wasn't clever enough to be a numbers guy, but like I knew in some form or another everything that's in the entrepreneurial operating system, everything that's in traction. I understood the principles. I think I'd maybe just confused myself.
Yeah.
I think sometimes the more studied you are, the more vulnerable you are to overcomplicating it.
Isn't that one of the key skills? Simplicity, and you're absolutely right. There's no rocket science in EOS, but you know what? There is discipline and there is simplicity in it. That it's not just like you and me and the senior management team. It's something that in order for it to work properly, it's got to be a tool that everyone in the business can understand and work to, and
Yeah.
that's the beauty of it, and that's the real good beauty of it. And I'm not there yet as a business, but a key this year, one of our goals was to ensure that every employee benefits to the full from the US process, and we're not quite there yet. It'll be a further goal. We've moved leaps and bounds, but that journey will continue next year. And
Well,
that was one of the reasons why I went to the conference day. It was because I wanted to understand, and I went to all the sessions that were going to enable myself and James to embed this deeper into the business. So we got some real good takeaways from that day. So.
yeah, no, and it's interesting actually, as I've sort of got to know the implementer community, like what a lot of people will say is that nobody ever gets to 100% strong across all of the components. That's kind of the fun of the journey. So when you did the 8 questions, so for those that aren't EOS aficionados, eight questions are just the questions that EOS teases out of a leadership team to get really clear on their vision. We won't go through them necessarily in, but like core values, core focus, 10-year target, marketing strategy, 3-year picture, 1-year plan, quarterly rocks and issues. There's plenty more to EOS, but that's kind of the starting point. How much of that was already known to the leadership team at the point that the implementer come in, or was there were the vision building days painful in some ways? Like how quickly did you get to answers to those 8 questions, and how long did it take to iterate on those answers?
I would say we didn't have a lot of those answers.
Really?
Well,
Well, me neither, by the way. Actually, I don't know why I'm sounding surprised.
no, look, a little bit now. Our ownership structure. So we're VC owned, and our ownership structure. I mean, it's not a secret that at some point that ownership structure will have to change. But what it meant was that we were more focused on the here and now, 1 year, 2 year, 3 year at the very most.
Yeah.
So we weren't really looking beyond our nose. So the first thing we did as a business, we certainly didn't have we'd started on the values piece, so we didn't have the answers for our core values. Those 2 days were just the best 2 days for the senior management team because we got to all those answers within those 2 days. We hadn't considered them, but we got to all those right answers. And one of the first things we, apart from the core values we did, we set our 10-year hairy ass goal. And ours was to grow in 10 years, 6-fold. So
That's amazing.
we're a £5 million business, and we said 10 years we want to be a £30 million business. And we have this. Our tagline is improving lives. That is our reason for being. So one of the that was one of the things that came out on the day. We'd already been using it, but that's what we said to everyone, the whole business. Our reason for being, CNI's reason for being, is improving lives. And today, or at that time, we were improving 125,000 lives a year on the way we measured it. And we didn't, at the time, we didn't say we want to grow our revenue 6-fold. We said we want to be improving 1 million lives a year in 10 years' time. We didn't talk numbers. We didn't talk revenue. We didn't talk profit. We didn't talk number of people. We just said we want to be improving 1 million lives a year. That's a nice thing to do. That's a nice legacy to leave. That's a nice ball to start rolling. And so I was again, talk about value. I was blown away the clarity we walked out of that 2-day planning session with all those eight questions answered. So we hadn't done it, but clearly, yeah.
I found exactly the same thing. Sorry, I didn't mean to get excited and jump in, but no. I found the exact same thing because we were investor backed. It is your duty as a leader to get those investors a return, right? Like that's how risk capital innovation happens. If they never get a return, then no more risk capital, right? Okay. So society sort of depends on it in the way our society's configured. If you want to get highfalutin about it, but it does make it a challenge. Did you? I mean, did the board just sign off the money because they trust you, or did they understand that you therefore were going to declare and lead the business towards a vision that was definitely going to go beyond their tenure of ownership? Because I never really had that conversation with my investors. I wish I'd been running EOS up front so that I could have sold the investment vision completely aligned with the internal
Yeah.
vision. I kind of discovered EOS after I'd raised the money. And so I slightly wrestled with that 10-year aspect of it. We did it, but it was a struggle.
Yeah, there's a couple of interesting points in there. So one, sharing with the board. I was very. It was clear to me that that ownership change was gonna take place quite early on within that 10-year cycle, and early on 0 to 5 years. So we knew a significant part of that. We shared it with them. In truth, how much that sang and how much that resonated with them, I don't know. Um, but going back to how I persuaded the board, they trusted me. So I had the benefit of a business turnaround. This business was losing money, breaking even in my first year. It lost money, broke even in the second year. I turned it around to a profitable business, and I had said, and the key thing for them, I said, in our restructuring, we are now focusing, and we are putting all our time and effort and energy and all our traction, some careful words here, into the areas of the business that we know work. In order for us to make that happen and grow at the pace that you want us to grow at, I believe this is an ideal opportunity and an ideal investment. And for the sake of that investment, £25,000-30,000, they signed off on it. But it all came from a position of trust. Now, again, we know that that's at the core of all business processes. You've got to have that trust. You've got to have that trust. If they didn't trust me, they didn't let me do it, I would have questioned whether this was the right business for me. So anyway, that was where it came from. So they approved it, and they wanted to keep a tight lid on it, and thankfully things started to happen. So.
I mean, I guess what makes sense as I kind of reflect on it, like being able to say to investors, listen, the 10-year vision might be beyond, 10-year target might be beyond your planned period of ownership. But if you're going to maximize value for your ownership, the next person that comes in as the owner, or next entity that comes in as the owner, has got to buy into a story. And of course, the new owner, it's their prerogative to maybe change the story. But nature abhors a vacuum, right? Like I can understand why if I was a VC backed leader trying to persuade my board or investors to go on this journey and commit to this 10-year target, I guess that would be the way I'd think about doing it, and say our 3-year picture, which is relevant to their ownership horizon, is sort of going to be informed by that vision. So it's something you might want to be invested in.
And that's a really important point, because if you and we crossed that bridge with our implementer at the time, where we went through that process of saying, look, I understand the 1 and 3 year in the context of the board, but I don't understand it in the context of the 10-year, which I fully subscribe to. We've been through the process. And they said exactly that. They said, okay, the ownership may change. And that, by the way, that might be me. I'm the majority exec shareholder in the business. If you don't have that 10-year vision, you don't maximize the EV of that business at the point where a change of ownership happens. So the world, as he described it, the world's not going to stop. The world's not going to stop, and the business is not going to stop when the ownership changes. So think beyond that, and that was a very easy thing for me to get my head around, and realise that actually that's 10-year goal it's certainly enabled us to get to where we got to today.
That's powerful.
So it was.
And then was there? You said that you've become really disciplined and accountable through EOS. I mean, obviously you're a brutal numbers man, so I bet you were somewhat disciplined and accountable before this. Like, in what ways has it impacted the operation and or the customer, which has sort of driven growth? Like, are there any kind of tangible things that come to mind?
Yeah, I mean, I talk about 2 words, and I've already mentioned them. The 2 big things for us were focus and traction. So you having simplified things, you discuss, you make decisions. You're not. For a while, I've learned, probably for a good 5 years now, I've learned to not be afraid of making a decision and getting it wrong. Don't get it wrong twice. So
Yeah.
traction is make a decision, revisit it. Hopefully that decision is the right one. If not, go back and change that decision. That's the traction, but it's also the focus. So the whole rock setting process, setting your goals. The amount of times, and every business does this, it's the distraction. The amount of times I now talk about, guys, that's just a distraction. That's not going to help us get to where we want to get to in the way we want to get there, which is, okay, yes, it will be one brick in a cathedral, but it's not going to lay the foundations of the cathedral. So to me, the two big things and the two big disciplines that enable us to go on this growth path has been the traction and the focus, and they are the two most powerful things.
Is that because the world you operate in, it's a very, very big market, the huge appetite for, I'm sure it's very competitive, but like that market does need products and services. Is that what creates that sort of magpie temptation to keep trying to grab revenue doing random stuff?
That is exactly it. I mean, if you look at a typical tender for us, that we go, there's some 320 lines on an equipment profile on the framework. We might bid for about 30 of them. The temptation of an unfocused business is to say, oh, I could do that, I could do that, I could do that. And all of a sudden you find yourself bidding for 60 or 70. And actually, one, you've not got the infrastructure to be able to do that or the skill set. And you end up spending 80% of your time trying to chase those other 30, 40 SKUs, as opposed to focusing on the ones that you know you're good at and you can demonstrate to the customer that you're good at. So yeah, there are hundreds and thousands of medical devices out there. So when we set the scope of where we want to get to when we improve 1 million lives, we have deliberately chosen our words to say we want to move. We're happy to add moving and handling equipment that is an assessment, and it's a specific type of thing that we are very good at. We're very good at going with an occupational therapist and helping them assess the user's needs. So the very simple thing to do is to say to the OT, when you're going in, you're not just assessing for our products. You could be assessing for something like a Zimmer frame or a tin opener. So it's looking for those opportunities that when you go in on a single call, you've got a maximum potential return. Now, that's not to say we're going to start selling products for 50p or a pound, because there's some very competitive market spaces. So it's got to align itself to our commercial goals as well. But there's a lot of stuff out there. But again, it focuses us and our attention on what we're good at, and that's the most important thing. We realize what we're good at, setting our marketing strategy. We know what we're very good at, and this is all the EOS stuff, but again, we went through that process and realized that, and we said, okay, this is where our future time and efforts should be. So
how have you found this concept of the visionary and the integrator? And obviously James isn't here to defend himself, but like I'd just be fascinated in, because I have some integrator characteristics. I guess it's the sort of the reformed lawyer thing. I have struggled to shake that off entirely, but I definitely bias towards visionary traits. I'm a better visionary than I am integrator, probably. How have you found working in those seats? And what advice would you give to others working in those two seats together?
The first thing we did, and the first important thing we did when we implemented EOS, is we did not have a visionary in our accountability chart. We did not. James was not the visionary. And that was because we'd come from a position of a business turnaround where we basically learned to walk again. And we said, right, we need to learn to walk before we start to run and do hurdles and go mountain. And that's where the visionary comes in. So once we had created a real stable environment, that's when, James was always trying to be the visionary. And in the early days, I was constantly saying, look, we've got enough within our product portfolio
with these 20 ideas,
but now I let him loose. And we discuss them as a team. Now we went through the Colby scoring, another EOS tool, and James and I couldn't be more opposite in terms of our profiles. And in fact, our implementer turned around and said that you two need to be wary of that, because that doesn't work sometimes. Completely opposite here.
That's
James,
brilliant.
again, that's down to trust and respect, and we've both got mutual trust and respect. And I think as some advice for anyone in that environment, that relationship has to exist. So if James comes along with 20 ideas and I knock 19 back, he doesn't get offended by them. We will have a meaningful discussion about it. And equally, I mean, last year he came to me with such a harebrained idea about something, and you know what? I laughed at him first of all. And I mean, this was a service related potential as opposed to a product. That's not what we do, James. We're products. Anyway, I went away over the weekend, thought about it, and I came back to him and said, do you know what? That might be brilliant.
That's
And
awesome.
and it was all around the training
Yeah.
of what we do, and it sort of opened my mind up to say, well, actually, we do that already. We do it free of charge as part of our service. The more we try, and part of our growth has been some of the fantastic training we do. As the investment in training has led to our growth now. So all of a sudden, this visionary comes to me with an idea that I think is a harebrained scheme, and I'm thinking, do you know what, that makes sense. With a broadened training offering, it opens up. There's 40,000 OTs out there. We sure as hell aren't hitting them all every year. If we got a broadened training, not only does it open up our products to more people, more users of the equipment, but actually it opens up other potential products as well. So that's the sort of visionary thing where we might clash and lock horns to begin with, but actually, do you know what? We work it out and sort it out and talk it through. But you've got to have that. I go back to, you've got to have that respect and that trust in each other as integrator and visionary, and be able to have those hard discussions. Oh, have we lost you?
No, I'm back. I'm back now. I've moved out to this country location. I find it very relaxing, but not necessarily as reliable as
It
being
looks
in
very
being in the
relaxing,
big
seeing
smoke.
them trees gently swaying in the background.
Yeah, no, I think we're okay. We're back. The visionary integrator relationship, I agree, like is so important. How you have mutual respect in both directions, because actually, you're right. It is very difficult when you're on the visionary side of that equation, understanding that those 19 rejections come from a good place, not a bad place. And a good integrator wants you to keep pushing the boundaries and thinking laterally and asking, do we think this is where our next opportunity comes from? I mean, just as you were talking, I was thinking, we think how well it worked for Rolls-Royce, right? Selling engines and then also actually making probably more money, more profit from servicing said engines. And then I was thinking about your uniques and this injecting this care into something that could feel like quite a kind of cold product. What better way to do that than educate one of your key stakeholders
Yeah,
around the care that's gone into that product? So I
yeah,
can see why it makes sense, but why it wouldn't have been obvious, particularly coming out of a turnaround mindset.
yeah. So the real good thing about those 19 rejections is that you don't just reject them. And by the way, that hasn't happened. He hasn't come with 20 ideas and I've rejected 19. But even in one, even if you take 19 on and reject the one, you learn from that, and that's been another real good thing of the EOS process, where you go through your rocks and you miss some rocks, and you don't do your to-dos on a weekly basis. You sit back and you learn from it. You say why and how's that impacted the business, and what can we do differently, and we've done that every step of the way, and that's no different with a potential idea that a visionary brings to the business. You say, well, okay, let's actually understand, having talked it through, why we don't think it's a good idea, because you learn from it and you make sure next time that the one that comes along is the one that hits the money. So, and that is a really important part of the EOS process, is the learning. It's not just a tick box exercise where you do your weekly meetings and you set your quarterly rocks. It's got to be an improvement process. It's got to be an opportunity for the business to improve. So,
I agree. No, we found it like therapy as well. Actually, one of the things me and Meg, the operations director at Yapsu, who played the integrator role for us, one of the things that she did, we had to do same page meetings, was critical for us, because I needed a vehicle to tell her where I was worried about something in the customer population, where I had this idea, and I was very very prone to blowing my organization off track, because I was the founder CEO. So I also had a sort of an actual and an implied authority I didn't always fully understand. And you come in and say something, shoot from the hip, and you can derail your organization pretty easily. And
Yeah,
for me, it was about having structured time with Meg to download onto her to then bring that into level 10s as appropriate, the quarterly sort of, strategy sessions and the like. And it meant I found EOS less frustrating than I think I otherwise might have. So I think for
yeah,
entrepreneurial people listening, that's something they need to take away
yeah,
that's sort of come out from your relationship with James.
yeah. I think the other really good thing about what we've got, and I'm not going to blow my own trumpet here, but any leader, and certainly in my position as MD, they need to know their numbers. They need to understand their numbers, because too often, if you've got a visionary who doesn't know his numbers, and actually as the MD and a visionary, they start chucking ideas and saying we're going to do it regardless, without discussion. If they don't know the numbers, that's where there's a risk of destroying any good work that has gone on before. So know your numbers, or have a good person who knows your numbers. Have a good trusted advisor who knows their numbers.
I wasn't expecting us to go there, but I am one of the things that was really bruising for me on my journey was learning the difference between abdication and delegation. And numbers was something that I abdicated for a long time, which I'm ashamed to say. It definitely impeded my ability to be a good executive, generally speaking. Do you find yourself coaching non-financial leaders to be more equipped with the numbers? What's your approach? Like, do you just tell them that it's important and then expect them to kind of get up the curve? Just curious.
No, I think I talked about the journey that I've been on as a numbers person. I dug into everything, so I moved into operations as a reason for explaining my numbers. So now
Right.
it's very easy for me to share my numbers in the context of an operational or a commercial background to the senior management team, to any member of the business. So yeah, I don't deliberately go out and way to coach, but I guess it's just my second nature that I'm always explaining things anyway to people. When I'm talking about numbers, I'm always explaining it in the context of the business. So for me, it's second nature. I would say that's something that I've developed and grown with over the years. It's not true of every accountant. Not every accountant is able to take that leap from the numbers into then saying, okay, how do we use that, and how does the business benefit from that information?
I hadn't thought about that, but actually, for entrepreneurs watching this that recognize they need to up their financial game and they were thinking about just hiring a finance seat and
Yeah,
forgetting about it, maybe they should consider bringing someone that's got a finance background but has also done a term in operations. So
yeah,
there's just less distance to travel between
yeah,
those seats.
yeah, absolutely.
Interesting. Ian, before we let you go, can we just talk scorecard briefly?
Yes.
So, for those listening, scorecard's a key part of the data component of EOS. You run your business on a weekly meeting that Ian's referred to, and you look at a scorecard that's supposed to give the leadership team an absolute pulse on the business. I know you can't give anything that's commercially sensitive. In terms of actual leading indicators that determine the forward-looking health in your business, Ian, are you able to give some examples of the sorts of things that you've realized the organization needs to be paying attention to? Because, of course, we're not going to talk about any actual numbers, but just the sorts of measurables that are important.
Yeah. So probably not a surprise to anyone who knows me, but so our cost base is quite tight. I'm a chartered accountant, and I run as tight a ship as I need to. So for me, this business is all about revenue. So our scorecard contains a number of top line drivers that are and enable us to become better predictors, but also see where we are in the here and now. So I alluded to going out with occupational therapists and doing assessments. So we've got a team of assessors who go out. So their levels of activity, we know through history, drive our future business. So we know if we maintain a number of assessments a day over a prolonged period of time. So that's a key activity based item that is on our scorecard. But also in new business, so that's established business. In new business, we're developing pipelines, and again, so our pipeline activity and our conversion rates is another important aspect for our business growth. So and then we've got the obvious one, which is we monitor our order intake on a weekly basis, and thankfully it's all moving in the right direction. So they're very much top line driven, top line growth oriented items on the scorecard. We then look at our performance. So our industry, when somebody needs a bit of equipment, they don't need it in 3 weeks' time. When assessment takes place, they need that bit of equipment there and then. And we often say if the occupational therapist has that equipment in the car, they give it to that user straight away. So for us, our delivery time is key. So we measure that. So that's a really important one, because that's in our business. It goes through cycles. It goes through cycles of quality, price, and delivery. I think the one that, in my mind, over the 30 years has always been the top, and that's the delivery. That's the speed of delivery of, from the moment that equipment is prescribed, how quickly can we get that equipment to the user? Now, some of that's out of our control because there's processes within the healthcare sector that they need to go through, some hoops they need to jump through, but we need to make sure that we play our part in that by when we get the order, we deliver it in the quickest possible. So that's a really important metric for us. We've then got things like warranty and customer complaints. Again, that's all driven. So one, the commercial, which is top line. We don't have any other. We don't look at costs. We don't look at profit. It's top line. And then it's how we're doing in delivering that top line in terms of customer service, speed of delivery, complaints, and warranty returns. So that's very much how we're geared.
I think what's so fascinating about you is a great story anyway. And, I love the way you talk about your business generally, and then EOS. But it's the fact that you're doing something that's, I think, is quite unusual for a VC-backed entity. But I think there's an awful lot that other founders backed by VC, and dare I say it, their investors, can learn from your journey. I know we're coming up on the time that you've got allocated. Are you happy for people to reach out to you if they're interested in what they've heard, whether they're investors, operators, or just EOS intrigues?
Yeah, I couldn't talk enough about EOS. I'm happy to talk to anyone about it. I can deliver a real message of how it's made a difference to our business. And what I'd say to anyone who's thinking about it, have a look, make an inquiry, because it is common sense. But how many people are sat at the breakfast table thinking, oh, this is common sense, I need to do this today, but never get around to it? What this does, it drives that discipline of, you do get around to some stuff, even though it's very simple. I mean, I had an example when I was young and just qualified. It was people used to come knocking on my door saying, I can save you thousands of pounds on expenses. Oh, no, I don't need you. I can do it myself. You never get around to doing it. And this is no different. I'm 30 years old and a lot wiser. So this is definitely something that I would say is worth having a look at as a minimum.
Oh, that's very generous. Well, listen, I'll put your LinkedIn and your email in the show notes. And folks, if you're listening and you found this useful, then Ian's happy to give you a 10-minute, 5-10 minute pro bono chat. And thank you so much for doing this. It's been amazing.
No, you're welcome. It was great meeting you on the day, and do you know what? It's actually re-energized me even having this conversation today. So thank you as well, Rob. So.